나는 그래서 Lama juge Lama tenche vechela ane chige Lama ti yakush tengore tima che ane Lama tenche vechela ya Lama liya ane chi tenche ta Lama ti sane chushugu me Lama ti chigi me sempi semba lo che ane liya chi Lama liya kyunche che bata Lama ya nyebe samba ane sem chupa la sopa teni cheba ina ane dizu chasa nyebe samba ta sem chuye de samlo nyamba tike chasa mikewa res zan delenza dela tinanga juge dunga anyongwe chagore stebo tin ngore saje ondo shine kasan di korang tu shirwa.
Good morning. So last night we continued to look at the presentation on the need to rely well on one's spiritual teacher, and in particular we looked at the faults that follow from turning away from one's Lama, from abandoning one's Lama. And those, in brief, because of the harsh negative mind that one generates when turning away from one's teacher, due to the strength of those negative minds, extensive non-virtue is created, which will lead to suffering.
Diki se ta dunga yong se den gyudi zo samle tene sa gyor wa chi ta samlo ya khondro la so pa de nyomo be samba chi ke we na an digi kien che ne je ho de le an zo ya an chi ke ta de wo bo rimba chi ne yong gru wa ta pe ne samlo na la khondro shuk chi mo chi ke we na den digi de wo lam sang khar le ge se ne nga zo ya chi ngem ba de kien ju ya dong ge num ju ngam ba de ki de ho di ko ngo so ra lam sa di le gru wa and dijela 가용 것은 나가서 셈마기 받은 거로 안데 어디 대시 콘라 시팅 주제하시 제리나 셈마기 받아야 어디 디젤에 가용 것은 디제보다 뭐 받아야 가지고 그 동안 용어야 강할 가르쳐베네 온두시네 다 제볼 마서나 그 직콘로 직사베네 디 제보들이야 짐바로서 멍보실래도 어디 나신 당어서 셈바 상부 현리아 펜베 삼바 자 펜베 삼바지 깨바이나 굴마 삼로 되지 깨요바나 다 삼로 디기 제보들 남상 농게 넘기네 이제 야보셔다 기시네 야보셔 안지 되는 시에도 안체 미기시고 가다 미통한데게나 셈내가 갈라라 깨와데 그두코라다 모스코란 디무로 다 디기 안지 제보 제헬 칼용으로서는 소수이나 어당에 되는지는 안지 야보충소 셈비 소소라 로데고 깨야다 셈제메고 로데고 주야 안 미션다기네 어데미디 정고아레 미배넘겨야고도 미 삼바상고여서야데 안 뛰어가야 되게 맞아 통시스교 버려와 나 디기 제보다 마음 바나야 가용으로서는 연제사 아줄이야 직디기 요야 돼 류티와다 셈기워야 돼 디기려야 돼 제보대 가서 짐발 마서나 공로 직사베네 디 제보 짐바시 몽불이고로와 디나징아도 셈바상보 제베네 디 제보 짐바 몽불이도와 디네 자다 조디 디두요 조디 규디 조디 셈레스 제산 셈디 약부 초디 야게 땅고레스 셈 안지기 뇨모베릭 셴네베 삼바 체베 삼바릭 두거릭디 차사메고 세고레스 제산도 소수가 라말리아 데니자 라말리아 따탕 방을 삼로 따나티게 라말리아 직 삼로 야고체다 제바체다 아니지 구접체다 디 야고체가 삼로 야고체바네 소소레 지부 야고모레스 제사 라말리아 삼랑한 바데다 데니게 뇌베 삼바다 체베 삼바 데니게바네 디티부 동아용 고레스 제 나닝보데다 아주 디송고로와.
Last night we also looked at how for independence on our particular way of thinking in any given moment. Our mind is either potentially dominated by afflictions or by wholesome ways of thinking. And depending whether our mind is dominated by wholesome ways of thinking or afflictions, the mind is said to be virtuous or non-virtuous. And then, following the influence of whichever minds are dominant, our speech is influenced by those particular minds, as it will be our physical behavior. So if we are dominated by afflictions, perhaps we're in a bit of a bad mood, then minds such as anger or the minds of their class, annoyance, frustration, are likely to dominate. We will show this in our facial expression. People will not only see this in us, but they'll hear when we talk that our mind is in an unhappy place, and we'll talk in a harsh manner. And similarly, our behavior may well, our physical behavior may well be harmful as well. And with the mind, it varies greatly also in terms of strength. So if the mind is particularly strong, the karmic seeds it deposits on the continuum are that much stronger. And if the mind is quite weak, those karmic imprints will be quite weak. So if, to state the illustration of anger, one's anger is strong and dominant, this is likely to have a great impact then on one's speech and behavior, and therefore the karmic imprints created are very strong, and the suffering results that will follow will be proportionately powerful. Similarly, if the affliction is much weaker, then it's likely to result in the mind, while still being afflicted, far less so. Therefore, the impact on speech and behavior will be less so, and the strength of the resulting karmic imprint and the suffering that results from that will also be so much weaker. So this is how our mind works, but not just on the side of afflictions, but also on the side of virtuous minds, wholesome minds. So this process we need to understand well, because by understanding it well, we will see the great importance at all times being mindful or aware of our mental process and ensuring that it is not overwhelmed by the afflictions. That if the afflictions are arising, we deal skillfully with that and we keep our mind on the side of virtue. And by doing so, by keeping the mind on the side of virtue, such as ethics and love and compassion and wisdom and so forth, then one is accumulating virtue. One's facial expression will also display be a facial expression of someone who's in a good mood. One's speech, one's physical behavior will all reflect one's positive way of thinking, one's wholesome way of thinking. And the stronger these wholesome minds are, the more virtue one accumulates, the greater the positive, wholesome, ripening results that follow. And moreover, whether the mind is in the direction of the afflictions or in the direction of wholesome minds, not only does this impact on our happiness or suffering immediately, as well as the karmic causes we are creating and therefore our future happiness and suffering, but also it has an impact on those that we interact with. We'll either become known as someone to be wary of because one's mind is often harsh, or we'll be seen as someone as trustworthy, as reliable, as honest and straightforward, and thereby form close relationships with others and be able to have a positive impact on the lives of others. So looking at this presentation and thinking about it well, one comes to see the great importance of taking care of our mind at all times. And then in the general context of relying on the spiritual teacher, ensuring that whenever thoughts of our spiritual teacher arise, we ensure that they are wholesome, virtuous thoughts. And if our mind is going in the direction of criticism, as we saw earlier in the text, we just let that go and return to recalling his many good qualities and the kindness he's shown to us, thereby naturally giving rise to an attitude of respect and devotion towards one's teacher. And this then it helps us to create virtue and strengthen our wholesome connection with him.
네, 자당 안주기 낭비 추기 냠는 제고래 곰 자고래 세대 조디 셈바 주와 땅고 거세로와 지난데 셈바디 빼 가서 삼로디 빼 마서 슉첨보다 뉴버첨보 시우지 지나 삼로디기 genchene digi phunson sobo druptuya samlo digi genchene anji kanga shu shukshimo ge dige chaza samlo dine yungorwa cheza dine za samlo de shukcheshora samlo raje cheza samlo de nyuba chimbora je cheza di inza da samlo de gyuwa dangje yaga chode pa gyurgyode ana ngaje digi phunson sobo di druptuya de chagor cheza da samlo dine jige bemasige nyuba chimboire denza다 낭비 추게 랍쳐 조디당 저기 삼로티 야도게 야와체 드네 야가 초데 뉴바 체르당 곰게 야 체르당 모레서 다 샘르야 저기 강화 영역이 영역 제부 강화 영역 리기 삼로 차사 안에 매버서 그래서 또 같이 네 디송으로 와다.
The meaning of Buddhist practice is to train the mind. And this is what the focus of the Buddha Dharma is. Helping students to come to recognize the importance of cultivating wholesome minds and abandoning unwholesome minds, and training how to do that successfully. Because it's through our way of thinking that we can make so many problems for ourselves and for others, or we can make our lives so much easier and we can enhance the lives of others too. Our mind really has tremendous power. This we need to recognize for ourselves, because independence on the clarity with which we recognize for ourselves, we'll want to apply ourselves to take care of our mind at all times, ensuring that our mind is staying ever more wholesome. And as we develop our habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, we proportionately weaken our habituation to non-wholesome ways of thinking. And in this way, we start to have a mind that is more at peace, at ease, and a mind that is ever less disturbed by the afflictions. So for these and many other reasons, the emphasis in Buddhism is on training one's mind.
Zanda samlo di shukchenpo inamainde nga zoge michigi samlo digi kun michigi samlo ngambaro chileba na digi chigmi mangpo la kanga che da zamli shasang la kanga che ko dewa me na zamli gyahap kha kha yi ne chasang la kanga che tuya chi chagdo wa ben di ro da nga zoge ji zamli na ya khor yu ko kanga da ji ma chu ko kanga ya digi shasang ma ye de shasang 당번에 미샤상 삼로디 마자와스면 삼로 뒤지기 기고 말와 디나는 뽀모 쏘 디기다 그런 게 되어 주다 마도 직 수수기 삼다제 지도 아니 지금 아직 야고스베 삼로시다 디마 지금 아직 야고스베 삼로시 리그로 군원레 살와 디 군원레디 그 잔달을 봐 체시된 차상 직 야고레스 봐 지금 지 랍제라 갸야도 시야도 그 미셔선 셈슈를 빠다 지 디기 코기인체 삼로디고 빠다디 제고레스베다 지 빼마서 셈을 마서나 슉첨버다 깨진 되는 마제다 차야디 차상 차거로 와 내가 저기 디멘비게 아직 지구바 제제 랑소르 다제 sögen 지 미sögen 몽불리요로 와 디차상 당보 그런 디메레 미션다 지기 직디 삼롱 안바지 케제 어디니 전에 야고하라 디 배강아 세티고 파 뉴베켈리 뉴베침보여서 되니기 군와서 되니기 슈긴디기 미 몽볼 야강아 테스트가 제거로 와 디나지 코르유 이내레 다로와 하셈방 안비초 삼다만 다 상비초로 삼다만나 근데 덴바샤게 두바로지 그런 게 샬리아 삼판바다 세외 삼비기 안에치기 상보시 삼다지 현유 동화세하다 강화세하다 디기두야도 두보도 셈베 군원 데니케제 삼라디기 다 데니기도 삼마다지 다보 상이 길어서 총 디기 말랍질 껴는데 데미 몽부질에 셈슈 파자 어디딩원에 레심 덴바르신 디 진주진에 나바 상예비기 데니기 빠도 매바 주야다 데 나다디바도 로 데니기 빠도 네투에디 차상 자위 덴바상예 줌nen디기 판베 삼로디 뉴바 슈 디왕게 다데바 도스체 내려요. 제가 도스나도 심주 체베네 가데 가네 쪼데 소스케 셈려야 라레디간 되기두야 동아세 제가 되네자 셈기 뉴슈티기 랑기 되기 류디기 대보샤다 규와샤다 땅투야데 셈기 뉴바데 류바자 제가 당하는 저기 남바상이 비기 롭정 쪼고디가 셈기 호라 삼로야 규와 땅다 삼로 장위 토네 곰자 거래세나 두치네 안데 디게 추름소야레 데니기 안데 제바제 가제 당보 퇴바제 퇴비 된데라 삼 야내야도 삼다 제바제 제바제네 되네 우연예수디 하고디 되네게 야고 셈 야도다 야가데 하고여도 되네게 셈 야고디 파고 접제 제지도 곰 된 누바차다도 스님는 제고래 해서지 나서 오르 송고야디 dum김자로 뒤로와다
Independence on our way of thinking, our speech will either be wholesome or unwholesome, and our physical behavior too will be destructive or beneficial. So the very root of a chain of events is one's way of thinking. From one's way of thinking, all the resulting behavior has an impact on oneself, as well as those with which one directly engages with, as well as through them, those one indirectly engages with. Where we can see this very clearly is how people in our world with power and influence, independence on their way of thinking and the resulting speech and physical behavior, they can bring great benefit or great destruction to our world. So if we look at all forms of, or all expressions of violence, such as warfare or between communities or even within households too, this comes from a chain of thoughts, one thought arising dependence on another, leading to an expression through verbal communication and physical action. And this brings so much harm to potentially innumerable beings. Another expression of this that is all too common is the environmental destruction that has been building up over centuries. All the abuse of the environment has come about in dependence on faulty ways of thinking focused on one's self-interest or the interest of one's chosen group. And from this harmful way of thinking, physical behavior, verbal communication resulted, bringing harm in one's immediate vicinity, and through one's behavior, on a far broader scale, harm has been brought to the environment as well. This shows the impact of ways of thinking. Particularly, it's very visible in our world through harmful ways of thinking. But we do have several remarkable illustrations of wholesome ways of thinking that have brought incredible benefit. Perhaps the foremost example is Buddha Shakyamuni, who with perfected qualities such as love, compassion, wisdom, and so forth, he brought the Buddha Dharma into our world, and because of the quality of his intent that led to his behavior and speech being such, so much benefit came to beings. Not just those who were fortunate or had the good fortune to be his direct students, and not just those who had the fortune to come under the care and guidance of his direct students, but for centuries since then, beings have been benefited by the Buddha's teachings because of the quality of the motivating mind. From these illustrations then, we can recognize the power of the mind on a grand scale, but also on a smaller scale, within a family, within a community, within a single individual. And I present these examples to encourage you to see the importance of caring for your own mind at all times. To the extent that we each can transform our mind, turning it away from influence from the afflictions towards being dominated by wholesome, virtuous minds, we will be ever more happier. Our own state of mind will be ever more at peace. And thereby, the impact that we have on others through our physical behavior and verbal communication will be adding to harmony in society, easing the suffering of others, easing the burden that others carry. And to bring this about, what's required from our side is to engage wholeheartedly, continuously over a sustained period in the combined activities of hearing and studying, and what we are hearing and studying, to reflect and meditate on that. And by doing so consistently, wholesome minds such as ethics, love, compassion, patience, wisdom, and so forth, they will arise in us ever more dominantly, ever more frequently. And in this way, we will transform our minds and the impact that we have on the world. Let's return to the text. We are in the handout, we're at the top of page 49. In the published book, we're in the middle of page 42. So starting from just beneath the quotation. Aside from that, excellent qualities that have not arisen will not arise, and those that have arisen will deteriorate and vanish. If you rely on non-virtuous friends and bad companions, your excellent qualities will also diminish. Your faults will increase, and misfortune will befall you. Therefore it was taught that this should be avoided in every way.
Lama teaching Chushu message Chushu Machina and Tugu Marmatuna in Dick Garimishing Marwa, this or Wadanga, Yende Majebana Gig Mareshe, Jebanam Yamne Trojans, Yama, that Yende Ocean Gotigina, Giligil Yamdra and Yamdro Eser, because Yagama Digo, some Tang Marwa, some Matane, didn't go Jeru, what I did Karina Dirvatish, Lobsang Dorje, di Beju Tana, Samta Bejumadana, Giligilition, Tushana Logic, Jane, Jana Charles, or Odisur, Adinaje, Zayunde, Yema Topsawati, Yamju, Dugri Essage, on Dustin.
In the context of where one has chosen to rely on a spiritual teacher, but then turns one's back on that teacher, what does no longer want to rely on them any further. So we look at the faults that follow from such an erroneous way to rely. Aside from that, excellent qualities that have not arisen will not arise, and those that have arisen will deteriorate and vanish. How this follows is that by now no longer relying on one's spiritual teacher, one will no longer be receiving teachings from them and guidance through those teachings on how to cultivate the Dharma within. Therefore, no longer receiving inspiration and guidance, the good qualities that one has already developed, they will start to deteriorate, because through relying on a teacher, one is given regular impetus or encouragement to cultivate virtuous minds, or inspiration to cultivate virtuous minds. Now, without that, those virtuous minds one has, that habituation to them will weaken and they will dissipate. Moreover, by not gathering further knowledge, one will not be gathering knowledge in how to develop the virtuous qualities that one lacks, and therefore one will be unable to develop new virtuous qualities. So this is what follows through the obstruction that one has created oneself by deciding to turn one's back on one's teacher.
Java Shuba in Asur, then the Java ina, and the Garigian was in Yunden Dipchin, Susuki Yama Yunden, Kitebe, Kiwicho Yunden Dima, Yunden Sade, Kiwicho Yunden Dima, Dip to me, Yam Dogres, 아니 gyun yu cho yu de gyun yu cho ne gyun de ki chasang pe ne so da ya mang chu res nyom mo berik samlati salmang berik di 아니 슈크차샤도 그래서 펜에 미디어바 기회에서도 다 미디어바스도 라시아 니가라 미디어바데 가르스네 가셈 강아 심 마기바다 루셈이야 강아요아들고 어디네 망고 용그리에시래.
Lama Tsongkhapa continues, if you rely on non-virtuous friends and bad companions, your excellent qualities will also diminish, your faults will increase, and misfortune will befall you. So this then, again, from turning one's back on one's spiritual teacher, one is then much more susceptible to falling under the influence of unwholesome friends, those who encourage one to, either through teachings or through their conduct, they encourage one to engage in non-virtuous behavior. This then serves to weaken the good qualities that you have, serves to strengthen one's afflictions. So in this way, by weakening one's good qualities and strengthening one's afflictions, one will accrue ever more non-virtuous karma. And from this, one will suffer. One will experience perhaps a great illness. One will experience various sufferings in this and future lives. And this too is what will follow from turning one's back on one's spiritual teacher.
다 미기위 기위신 템바이 나딘 용그레세 당한 미기위 기위신 세야들이야 나 도스 가제 미기위 단 제위 토네다 용야기 델랍지게 한들 시그로 말로든 지겐들라 고고와 데네자 최초다네 용시그로 데네게 오다 지게 제 랍칸 임바지라 안지게 안지게 셴 랑기 최게 토려 안지게 차과쇼 셴이 최들이 당화제네 안려바 제거를 뒤서 매가서 거래서하다 안지수 강화 제거래서하다 안디면비게다 지게 대수 디니기 안주 철이야 바시지고 뒤서셔서 쇠고래서하다 디니지 납제게바이나 다데 미기비기 신예사지 안데 다디 셰바들레 디데 델야 안지 코셰바나 콜야 가부치니 시간절라 가부치 니니 시간디게 셰바나신 소수기 어디 약고래선 제수장제 덴바 냠는 가수 제수장제 내가 자와를 자와 제바이나 데 미기 신예 대다 조바서 덴바로와 디니 덴여도 안 가르로서는 신이랑기 샤리아 차와제 샤 소주야 샤리아 차와제 강아제 리어도 디디버사고로와 지나다 미기비 균이 초디 아니 유체로 보러와 다 지나 다 기비 초디 안 소수기 샤리아 판바다 네비게 지금 네비 지금 메시메 삼로디 슈충로 보러와다 지나 디세오로와다.
What's presented here can take various forms. It could take the form of where one, having turned one's back on a spiritual teacher, one then now comes to rely on a different teacher. And the result of this could well be that one is encouraged to look back on one's former religion or one's former religious tradition or former teacher and criticize and belittle them, seeing them as worse, disparaging them. So one may be directly encouraged in that, or it may be the outcome of having severed the relationship with one's former teacher. Through that negativity, now one serves to further obstruct one's former good connection through criticizing, looking down on, belittling, and so forth. So this then creates severe obstacles within oneself, that in the future one is likely to, due to the strength of these new imprints that are being created, that this is likely to create further obstacles for oneself. Another way that this could be expressed is that one could be directly encouraged to engage in non-virtuous behavior. Certain ways of thinking could be seen as could be encouraged to engage in, presented as being wholesome, whereas from the perspective of Buddhism, those would be afflictions and to be abandoned. So in this way, one's new spiritual teacher or new friends could be one's aids in the cultivation of non-virtue and in the strengthening of unwholesome ways of thinking.
Dinea, Semje, Soche, Chopugore, said Dinigi, Marches, Chopugore, says she had the DJs or Jaja, Semjan Soja, Semjam, Soja, Chopuya, the only Jike, Gahodu, Geshe Ina, Semje, Soche, Channel, Tawaji, Nugorova, Jason, Semje, so Judu, Guno, Yigorova, Channel, Nugorova, Jason Dinigi, Jabina. And Jesu Jamba, and you make a senior Dempas or that do sooner Jigio Mares as it is over. That dinner Javana and then Suzuki Gawa, Shelia, Pembe Summer gave you some of the Pashu Chun Roadam, and then they begin some of the Shuk Cherru or Essage and those children. And the Magic debut draw and debut draw and Dingo Mares, the debut draw said the Ajik Suzuki, the nigger Lama, that the nigger Lobju Gimena and Jigger. Namune, Shelia, Jishen Yichela, Kuma, Guya, La Sobana, Shelia, Never Chia, La Sobana, Soja, Kavuji, Deniji, and Denigi Michi, that two in Dropoya, Wachina, Chick, Kusheva, Nashin Yambana, or the ring at the dinner at the Tichela, Kuma, Japjan, Chitushin, Chick, Bishop Nikalinga, Dangadro Sada, and Jimilia, Tubzeta, I think on the dignity, Colia Tubzet in the Chichia. And the nature, and she didn't answer some jay soldier, the nature was a big, the niggy Geshe, Colia, Quesheva, George, Quesheva, Nashi, and Delia, Jesu Janji, Quesheva and Jevana, Dibu drop with Dembasi or the niggy Cheodu, and also in there, Shelia, Never Cheada, and the niggy Shelia Tawacheda, and Shen Yuku, Kumogola, Divasaya, Digi Yenjene, that's Susugi. Shelia, Nube Sambas, Samloti Pa, and Chikje, Nishe, and Chik Sumje, Dinner, Samloti, Commission, Yana, then Jema, and Sosugi, Tibu, Mevene, Sosuchibuine, Jia Charo, and Sosugi Genjena, Shanda, Mi Yahu Hendike, Lucene, Tijuage, Nyangachimungurua, Dineza, Dibu Droponium, the Dingo Mares, the Dibu Dropot, and Migi, the Magawa, and Kunji Gomar Sungo Maria. Consulia Tuba in a Tumbuche, that did the Aurova, in a Consu Sheva Nahinji, Jesu Janji, Lalan Degio Marese, she's a Demba, the Tibuto Demba Sigura, Migration Demba, and Drobit, Tito Demba, the Consula Govucho, Consu Sheva, Jesu Janji Jevana, Tito Demba, the Migration Demba Sigura. And the Munjidane may Tumbuche, Geshe and Jigme, Jada Kalarium no Sevene, Dembaska Marwa, Chagomare.
The way non-virtuous friends and bad companions can influence or guide you, again, we should understand that there could be quite a variety here. So one could be encouraged, for example, to take life, to kill other beings. Or at the very least, one could be influenced by others not to particularly value the life of others. So this could thereby directly or indirectly lead one to accumulating non-virtue. And at the very least, because of these influences, the virtuous imprints one has, they will not be nourished and they'll weaken and dissipate. But more likely, one will be guided down paths of action that create non-virtue. And if we think of, and again, the way to understand this, it refers to a broad spectrum of people, whether it's new spiritual teachers, whether in the same or different religious tradition, or whether they're just one's new mates, people that one hangs out with. Whichever, they have an impact on us. We are influenced by their way of thinking, their way of acting. And they may encourage us to engage in unethical courses of action. Things that now currently would seem inconceivable, then they become normalized. And one engages in thinking, they're okay. And the problem is that slowly one becomes habituated to this way of thinking and this way of acting. And this then serves to create severe obstacle on one's continuum to later coming under the care and under the guidance of a genuine spiritual teacher. One may well, due to the imprints one has created in the past, meet spiritual teachers, genuine spiritual teachers, they may well reach out to you, wanting to take you under their care, turning you away from these unethical paths of action you are now engaging in. But because of these internal obstacles that one has created by turning one's back on one's teacher, by embracing unethical behavior, it will be very difficult for you, from your side, to trust them, to rely on them, even though from their side they are genuine spiritual teachers.
Denigi da gyön yongwe za yönden tipchin gyön nam pewa midöba gewe sido sosugi gewe samla dige ma shuk chung zhoya da shenle nyoba dan cewe samba dige migewe samla dige shuk chir ruguyo ba yinza ne dene yinza da nganzu ge mogoya di migewa kasa kanga di migowa za kanga yonga di yudi ne migewe samla dine yongwe za dene yinza da namba tamche do bangwa chawo sonso sido da gedi ne duda namba kondo
Lama Tsongkhapa concludes this section with, therefore it was taught that this should be avoided in every way. So from these explanations we see that by turning one's back on one's spiritual teacher, one is very likely to end up creating far more non-virtue and heading towards in the direction of suffering evermore. So not wanting to suffer, we should do all that we can to end up in such a situation.
Number tamjedo bangwa jawo sedu denege migiwe shinyen dan dibi dropa tikele pe magawa che dan gezin konsolia anjik jawa ma cheba konsola magawa che dusine jike jawa gyune meba dan konsola magawa che 통중 da dene jiyo jeore se sing sungo mare namba bangwa che ya dene goyegi nyanga yorba namba tamje bangwa jawo le be kharcho konsolia konjuge shebege 죄방아가 현려 체외스마 뇌베스마 동화여야게 녀모베 온도 소비게 자와델파 안 기디나 지겨 말해서 방화자 워서다 남바탐지 방화자 워서야데 건주기 될야 조워지 띵제 안지 건주기 지게 냄비게 자와체디 자와디게 남바탐지 방화자 워 기니 지겨 말해서 뭐도 지게 건설야 야지 대절에네 잠보 고미하다 인제 고미하다 지금 야구 제고에디 인제고로 와다 그 전신배 냠는 제인데 심지어 탐절이야 내링 매바 아니 잠제 잠겨셔야 돼 이렇게 침으로 제가 소주기 디비 조고시네 수디스님도 거부체 안 튠부체 안 고주기 그 제방 안 받에 신기 구멍구에 삼로던 안지게 신을 너버체에 삼로디기 파수 유르제네 야고야 유럽제야 돼 나중에 직배주다 돼 Geshe Thubten Rabten ko samlo de chebo yula konyum de tumbura je be yahu je an sosol ya gobu se jebe ne sosu Geshe de nyengruwa 제가 뉴스전장 안 tumbuche yahu je an je sosu 판도주에 줍지는 거라냐 안데 고마지네 야고 망한서 차상 강아데 디지 마지네 야고 도와 안딜레데 레가 되는 전에 야가 도와서 탑람 두시는 뜸바이나 안 고 유튜브로 와 제가 다 넘버는 방와서 콜러 저기네 매바 결로 고배 두지아래 통중 나도 저 매바 제셔바나 그 콜러 저거제 두마고 삼는 유튜브에 가려고 와 제가 디네 넘버 tum지 방와 저어서야지 먼저 가르코스에 어떻게 저기네 맞제 될려 통장 균에 자오면 거지 저 맞제 맞제 콜파 안지 배두지아레스 데네게 삼다 저기네 말에서지 고에게 닝아도와 근데 멤버체 방와자세디 그 제수 대비게 현래 채워다 네베 300개 제수는 내가 안 받을 주바디 남바탐 방와자고 지교 말에서지 제수랑 교 말에 세수를 다 소소게 잠바다 제와 안 튠부제 아니 그에 삼로당아 저방 안 받지 수 유르시네 상배토로 유튜브 제디 아니 안지 제고 거라다
The very heart of the guidance within the Buddha Dharma is for us to come to know ourselves well, to understand our own minds, and therefore to strive to cultivate wholesome minds. And to recognize that unwholesome ways of thinking, the afflictions, these are our sole enemies. It's these that we need to fear, and these alone that we need to fear. then building on that recognition, we'll want to rely on, be influenced by, spend time with those who help us in developing wholesome minds such as love, compassion, ethics, patience, and so forth. Those who set a good example. They are a living example of someone who's guided by those ways of thinking. Moreover, we'll want to receive guidance from such people in that they are the ones who can help us cultivate these wholesome minds ever more within us. Similarly, we'll recognize that our sole enemy are these afflictions, and therefore circumstances, people, events, and so forth that serve to stimulate one's destructive thoughts. These one needs to be apprehensive of, fearful of, be on guard when in such circumstances. This then is a more skillful, this is the way to understand what is being presented here in a broader context. And with that, we should understand that those individuals that one could say are non-virtuous friends or bad companions, those individuals are not a problem. Those individuals are not to be feared. What we need to be on guard against is not those individuals, but the afflictions arising within us. So here, there's a balance that we need to draw, of not seeing the individuals as our enemies, but our own afflictions as our enemies. And rather where we recognize that others are dominated or guided by afflictions, by ignorance or anger or attachment, to have compassion for them, but also not to be on guard of our own mind for afflictions arising. And those afflictions could either be where we become influenced and act in a similar way to them, or we have a negative mind towards them, criticizing them, looking down at them, so a mind of pride, or an angry, averse response to them, so coming under the influence of our afflictions. This too is to be guarded against. The skilled practitioner holds all as dear, not just those who act in accordance with their wishes and their views. A skilled practitioner holds all as dear and sees the sole enemy as their own afflictions. And with such a skillful approach, the skilled practitioner will perhaps not interact so much with those who are bad friends and non-virtuous friends and bad companions, so as not to be influenced by them, but their heart will remain warm towards them, and their relationship will not be one of adversity. And this means that there is no obstacle to helping such people, to having a positive influence on such people, when in the future an appropriate opportunity arises to interact with them in a wholesome manner. Whereas if the practitioner previously had been unskillful and created conflict with those that they considered non-virtuous friends and bad companions, the possibility to be of benefit to these beings will be severed. So this is a skillful way that a practitioner will understand a topic such as this.
Andi Angelia, Lama Tempe, Penang, Dama Tempena, Tensu Yakushma Tempena, and then Yemi said in Dusine Yashisare, that in Ma Dor Pachik Dushavena, Kasumersene, and in Ma Shere.
That concludes in the outline of looking at the faults that follow if one abandons one's spiritual teacher, turns one's back on one's spiritual teacher. And now Lama Tsongkhapa concludes his topic with the outline, summary of the meaning of these points.
and the Tseyang and the Dinguela on the departation.
Reading from the text, Lama Tsongkhapa writes, the instructions widely known as Guru Yoga should also be understood according to what has been explained above. It will not be enough to perform the visualization in a single meditation session. When you pursue a Dharma practice from the depths of your heart, you should rely on a spiritual teacher who guides you unmistakably over a long period of time.
Zanda Deterna said the Gumzin show, Deterna Gumzin Deterna, Tinina Sura. So Gumzen Garel W. That Lama, you see, Lama Tempa ina and the Payan in the Yore. So Lama Matemba in Lama Tenche, Tenzo Loba ina, and Chigi, Denetine Chigi, Tebodin the Yungri, setting to Galia Shusarwa. Says Dini, Lama Yahu Tempa ina. And so there, paying Chimbu Yoma, Yakuba, and Nemi Tinche, Yakuji Macheba, Tell Lama Tinsu Lobaina, the nigger Ganga Chiyu Baza, the Dana Gumze Dini Inza, down the Lama Dima Dianti, Chiki, Lama Din, Dini Dimbi, Dinsu, the Yamlan Yakushed, Gachimbu Shur, Zat, Bemas, Gachimbu, Gachimbu Shur, Esungor, that on that Nimbola, Detana said, Gumzen Sungorba.
The Tibetan starts with, we don't have it in our English, but it starts with something like, in that case, or therefore. So this is then linking what has come before, now to this summary section. So here Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, now having studied all that has come before, you've come to understand well the benefits that will follow from relying on your teacher. In other words, by relying on one's spiritual teacher, one will be creating causes that will result in your spiritual development and your progression towards enlightenment. You've also come to understand the faults that will follow by abandoning one's teacher, because through abandoning one's teacher, one severs one's possibility of spiritually developing independence on this qualified teacher. So these causes and their results have been understood.
Yongzo Yamlinche, Yongzo Laminajo than TV, Gomgora said the Bagera, Chasanji, Geshe Thubten Rabten, or Laminajo, she Yonso Java, young Javi Damasa. They are Garilla, Ganachi Gogos, Narshebata Gogo Kis, Narshebata Gogo Kis, the Niel Garasheson, Dishebana His or Narshebata Gogo Kis.
Then Lama Tsongkhapa writes that the instructions widely known as Guru Yoga, so widely known, then we can see Lama Tsongkhapa saying this practice of Guru Yoga is quite famous. And he continues, and it should also be understood according to what has been explained above. So therefore, if to the extent we've understood what has been presented above, we can use that as our basis to understand the practice of Guru Yoga.
Lama Lama Gevishin Dena the Carzosne Lama Gevishin Dene that Densu de la Gevishin Densevich like Dembu Tudela Sambukoni Densu Jugoni Densu New or Dires or Dalama Lamina Yamlenche said Lama Densu de Yamlenche and the Deneres, China Sambukoni Lami Kusun Tusu and then Delaya Devaki Devatici do Comia. And Anjig Lamigi, Jig Ranlia, Jig Yamling Rimba Tenship, Ran Tenshipatelia, getting Chimbo Imba, sometimes getting Jesus Jen. Chizan did getting Jesus Tempe, Tony Yamlin Chiati, that Narshaba Dirwa, Chizan Din Yamlin Chiat, down to Lamina Yamlin Chia said, Didn't she or
And in particular, when we see here what has been explained above, this is referring to the several outlines before, where it was presented how to rely on the spiritual teacher. And it was presented in two broad outlines, how to rely through thought and how to rely through action. Relying through thought had the two subdivisions, that of recalling the tremendous qualities of one's Lama, the qualities that he expresses through his physical activities, the qualities he expresses through his speech, and his mental good qualities. And reflecting on these so as to generate deep and abiding trust or faith in one's spiritual teacher. And the second way to rely on the Lama through thought was to recall his incomparable kindness, the kindness that he brings to you and so many others, also so as to generate a deep reverence for one's spiritual teacher, to make one open and receptive evermore to his guidance and his input, thereby speeding one's spiritual development.
Lamige shivju shuya da anjiki kaso sansingi chobo puya, drubi chobo puya, nyamling jedi dushene sonruwa. Jizada drubi chobo puya sede lamige ma songshia bade nyamling dusu gomgor dini jangor sede songadi sosugi nyamling je sosu gomjadi drubi chobo yinsero. Jizada lamige najo gomgori sede lamige najo danganzu lungdo ngada dini karinda bichi lamige nyamling jegor sede. Jizada lama di pa Lama li zhejidu gom, Lama li mibi devaji, Lama li mibi ke nijige gejin jesu rinbige, gejin jesu rinbige, nijige jesu rinbige ni gujeb je. Denigi jebe tone, Lami ge ma, sosu ge chwe na, sansin ge tone, Lama li cheo puya gang yoba nana, gang sosu ge nibi chogo yo puya je. Dihele zo sosu ge Lami ma dian shebe, damga nyamlen dine chegor songa di, sosu ge chushi no gomye nyamlen chea di, Lami na jo gomba se di, no dine chilo go go re so da, dedar go go ki se. Dine chi yawo gombe na Lami na jo gomba re so da, dine chi ma jo na dine Lami na jo de yawo ra chi, cha du me ba na.
So where it says here, what has been explained above, this refers to the presentation on how to rely on the spiritual teacher, which was presented firstly through thought, so that I've just reminded you of, which has the two divisions of recalling the Lama's good qualities, and secondly, his kindness. And the second way is that of action, so thought and action. This has three parts. The one is through making material offerings. The second is through providing physical assistance and speaking respectfully. And the third is of practicing in accordance with his teachings. So through relying initially, through first training in reliance on thought, and developing a deep appreciation or deep recognition for the qualities of the Lama, and a deep appreciation for his kindness, one will thereby naturally or genuinely rely through action. Where one has the abundance, one will make material offerings. When one has the opportunity, one will provide physical assistance. And where one speaks to and about one's teacher, one will do so in a respectful manner. But of these three, by far the third is the primary offering to make to the teacher, the primary way to rely through action to the teacher, which is to practice in accordance with his teachings. And this is where the student, through having reflected well on the many remarkable qualities of their teacher and his incredible kindness, they will be open and receptive to the guidance that he's giving in teachings, and they will strive to cultivate that guidance within them through this process of hearing and reflecting. So training well in this way, as explained above, then one's Guru Yoga practice will be successful.
yarge yak mato bado an dosina gongo gore mado mi ba thunre zamji mi sho sarji gomba zamji sarji ni gomba zamji an semle ya ku yota da ya gong ji ni ba gombe de tang tu yale yung ma le che sa de muti ne gom gore se song gore.
Lama Tsongkhapa continues, it will not be enough to perform the visualization in a single meditation session. This is making a point that is often made, which is that to transform the mind takes repetition to develop these new habitual patterns, and repetition over a sustained period. So merely doing the visualization in one or a few meditation sessions is insufficient. One needs to train one's mind repeatedly over a sustained period.
자단 닝타바네 최시 제나니 만오어티베 기위 신인지의 균리도 땡괴라스 제 닝타바네 최시 제나시 되다 아주게 셈딩네다 코웨 동화들을 죄시 야다 땡예 대화 타바 탐지게 보고 토구도 선백에 삼로식 되는지 셈딩네파 두시에 삼바이나 안다 가르고고스네 라마노와 치겐 냠네 림바 마노와 따다 약부 치투에지 개위신 땡고래 대야 살직 디자인의 최주바생 지고 말 균형도 땡고라서 균형 무제의 땡제 디자인의 최양의 양도 휴제 땡고고래지래.
Lama Tsongkhapa continues, when you pursue a Dharma practice from the depths of your heart, you should rely on a spiritual teacher who guides you unmistakably over a long period of time. So when one gives rise to a sincere aspiration to attain the results of the Dharma, in particular if it's the final goal of attaining the state of omniscience, it's imperative to rely on a spiritual teacher, someone who can guide you to develop and transform your mind to an extent that you never have thus far. And one must not only rely on a spiritual teacher, but just as in the previous sentence, this can't be something one does now and again, but one needs to rely on the guidance of one's spiritual teacher over an extensive period of time.
미디 장와선 비게 심슈지 야고 주여베나 디니게 라펜 겐디 베 야고랍싱엔디 게치무슈로와 제나디 야고랍 마신와데 노교랍나 아니디 소수기 노교 장루고 노교 장소나 마오바네 팬야 살레 네바 마부기 용로와 데자다 라펜디 게치무슈시 야고치 랍싱엔지 고고로와 야고랍싱엔디 디자네 살직이 자와 잠기 소수기 멤버 개발 차도 얘기해봐 요 말와 제산 멤버 디스 땡기인디 야고 땡지 들이야 야네 균능부 땡 디자네 롭션 제베네 소소 야고 차도고로 비디나진 지부지가로와 당한 저게 롭션 가레이네 제산 디네 자다 데니게 소소 탈바 탐지 캠보고 토구도 선배다 디마톤 탑 미누 선배 샘쇼지 삼로지 냠는지 되어바시래도 데니게 람이 심버 치상들 신간 마노와 제 마노와 고레 마주고 약보지 티싱에 개위신이 고고래서 니 개위신이 디여 라바이네 디자라 살지니 아니 티바 잠기 아니 티 야고 차도 말레스 제가 디자는 라마 디자네 야네 쉬신 쉬신 아니 균능부 된 고고래서 누스 템바이나 아니 소수게 냠는데 약고 고래서 딱이 네 제가 개위신이 디 개체와 임바 자 첨부 인바다 지난다 개회 신이디 개 첨부 인자 데네게 마노와 람마투어 디바치 고고리에스 다데 데네게 개회 신 라요도 소수기 된한디게 배 야보진 된 고고리에스 배수신다 된지 균능부 된 도시 냠는 저거래 디니가 야고 준바데 데네 야고 차이에서 그래 디니네 직 야고 마저나 데네 야고 마셔로 와데 기에네 야고면은 소수기 배전시고 자베네 너저 람나 너저 장의 얘기 줘야 매래 다 예 야고 싶으다고 마저 추베네 所以说我呢，在查经验上，当然这上是没晓得也给做对面的，就是在母体些，这个样呢都是尊重些推过去过来。但第二个图上为那的检查上，个说推荐检查上推不一张，就要不中啊张，在这部的就会用来收入的，用来收入。
What's presented here is really how it is in reality. We know this from society. So if we want to employ the services of someone, we want them to be skilled in what they're doing. And this is the case in any walk of life. But to take a very obvious example, if you are going to entrust your life to a surgeon, you want that surgeon not just to have read a few books and watched a few videos. You'll want them to be properly trained to the point where they can work unsupervised, where all those who have trained them have confidence in them. And this is the case for a surgeon, it's very obvious, but in every field where we rely on the skills of someone else, we want them to have been trained properly. So now, spiritual context, where we have the aspiration to radically transform these deep-seated habitual tendencies that we've created over lifetimes. This is something that takes consistent effort from our side and care and guidance from a spiritual teacher. These two coming together, a teacher who's genuine, an authentic teacher who is qualified, and a student who wants to apply themselves, who has a deep yearning to spiritually transform and a deep trust in their teacher. There's this interdependent relationship between teacher and student. And this is important to keep in the forefront of one's mind. No matter how qualified the teacher may be, they cannot do the work. The teacher and students have this interdependent relationship where both need to be committed to the process of transformation. And if either is lacking, the teacher is not qualified or the student is a bit half-hearted, the result will not follow. But if the teacher is authentic, has a genuine motivation to help, as well as skills within, and the student is open and receptive, has genuine trust or faith in the teacher, and the student wants to apply themselves to transforming their mind through consistently applying the teachings, then radical transformation will definitely follow.
나는 네 체양 제가 위시네 세단 아마 제가 위시네 가르송요로스네 네 체양 시대 네니기 라마 띠엔치 냠는 집에 갑라시오로 다지 네 체양 네니기 집에 라마 제가 위 가르송요로스네 제가 위시네 라마 띠엔 도자나 방도유 송바 따르스 네니 송마레지레
Lama Tsongkhapa then continues. As Chekwa also said about such an occasion, when you rely on a guru, you may have doubts and abandon him.
Lama Chekwa 가르송라스네 라마 딘 도자나 방도유 사시 송로다. 지난데 돈다 가르송 라마 딘 안델야 도자나스 라마 비제지 라마 무유아체 라마 딘데 딘나데 야고체 라마 야고치 니여도 델야 딘나 마주아체 베소소기 왜네 딘부시 야고치 딘바이나 안에 가르송라스네 라마랴 균다야기당 니주제 디기당 라마랴 독과당 딘수차스바 지방고리에서 방 디네기 방바이나 안에 소소기 윤대 뭐 공패도 용하디 용그리에서 디네기 방네 윤대디기 소술랴 중그리 사시 송고로와다 돈다잉 버리스데.
So what Chekwa said was, when you rely on a guru, you may have doubts and abandon him. What's being presented here then is, as we've seen before, that one may have created the causes to be in the presence, under the care of a genuine spiritual teacher, someone who can guide one to enlightenment. But due to not relying in the way that is presented here, when doubts may arise, and then the mistake comes in dwelling on those doubts. So one may well perceive faults in one's spiritual teacher, but as we saw earlier in the chapter, there the guidance is to not focus on those, but to move one's attention rather to his many good qualities. But by dwelling on the perceived faults, then one may well abandon the teacher. And not only does one abandon this genuine teacher who could have brought so much benefit to you, but you lose that opportunity of spiritually developing. Lama Tsongkhapa continues, since you will only lose without gaining if you do not know how to rely on him, it becomes evident that the cycles of teachings about relying on a spiritual teacher are more important than any others. They are the root of fulfilling your long-held aspirations.
지산다 라메 된 찬에 다 라메 된 수디 봐 야고치 야고 띠마 지기 된 수디 야고 마신 왜나 아니 캡사 말하게 살로 용어라게 해지르와 다 가르레스네 라마지 바티 된 야고 마신 와 있나다 지들 라말야 균주제야 라말야 아니 지기 셈마기버스야 강한테야 내내게 제바이나 된 야고 마신 와 차그로 된 수시 신고 말와 네 제자 되니자 dini cheba ina lama la nye chue chiya, gyun chue chiya, an dini ki cheba ina chisa de gyun ra gora, karasana nyo mo ba ki gora, sosu gyo la nyo mo ba ki gora, dini ki nyo mo ba tsara chiga samda, nyi samda, nyo mo de shuk cher cher zhoya da, di debu, ane nga zile ganga yuwa, dunga yuwa de chagu inza, an lama ten chue ma she ba she, dini ki lama la gyun chue chiya, an chi gyun daya da, nyo mo ba, chiga nyo ba chiya ki, dini ki samlo kowa da, nyo ba ngusu cheba la so ba chunwa ina, 지사 라메 템바디 이 템비게 금전제네 캡사라요 마 용라고 디부사요 그래서 그러다 지사 디부사비 디부 동아용 거래스
If one does not rely well on one's if one does not rely well on one's spiritual teacher, relying well in the way that Lama Tsongkhapa has presented, it will be primarily you, that loses out. It will be you that loses this remarkable opportunity. And not only is this remarkable opportunity lost, but by having, in particular, if one focuses on perceived faults in the teacher, one will criticize the teacher, perhaps even revile or disparage the teacher. And from this process, the afflictions within one will just continue to grow and dominate. So despite having created the causes to have met and come under the care of this remarkable being, instead of this opportunity leading to radical spiritual development, one ends up creating powerful causes for further suffering.
나디 슈레야 라마디 텐주 야고 신웨이나 소소레 캡사 야고라기 레스거로 와다다 게위 삼로다 냠내 림바디 공원에 온도 페기리야사시.
But that being said, through knowing what's presented in this chapter well and applying it to yourself, taking it as personal advice, so much benefit will come. By relying on one's teacher in the way that Lama Tsongkhapa is guiding, so much benefit will come.
dine inzada shenyin tenbigi chugor di ane chugor di nam gangle yang gai chewa ten yu du me zawar nang wo sida chisa dine ge gewe shenyin ten je tenbi nyamle chik ten sui di pe masi ge chenpo shu gewe shenyin ten sui di ge chenpo shu chiri es chisa ge chenpo gangle yang sida lega kare le ne di ge chewa re es wo da ge chewa re es 지난 같이 와래스 임비게 땡기 뒤미게 자와래스 내가 땡기 뒤마스도 마음비게 디기기 토베게 자와디레스 내가 내가 저기 가르친 띵기 뒤마세도 당가 저 동아 자와기나 디기 이거 해야 돼 탈바다 탐지키면 고번 토야 되는 저기 되바 자와로 제자디 토베게다 자와들 수 있는 거래 전에는 자다 신인디 배마스기 띵다디 계침부 야고시 띵과디 배마스 계침부래 해서 돌드나 저기 되니게 다신이 야고 띵바 띵제 야고 띵바이나 소소를 캡상 야고라고 그래 탈바 탐지키면 고번 토두고 그래 제자 신인 띵제 되래 야고지 마띵 바지 배 띵수 로바다 되니게 균제제와 라마라 강아데 뇽몽부 줄에 껴바이나 소소를 경하라고 그래 되니자 기비 신인 띵하고 거 냠는 제배 마스 내가 가르치 나네야 이게 최초들이었어 이 취재 인비금제 가르스네 아주 탈바 탐지기 뭐고 토에 자와디 냠 디기 랍hen 될 때는 아주 신고로 와서 신내는 검자고로 와서 되는데 자와디 인자 디 계치 모시고 해야지 다단다 닝보티 송도
Lama Tsongkhapa concludes this paragraph by saying, it becomes evident that the cycle of teachings about relying on a spiritual teacher are more important than any others. Then he presents the reason. They are the root of fulfilling your long-held aspirations. So what is presented here really is the case. These teachings are so important because it's through relying on our spiritual teacher that all our spiritual development will come. Therefore, relying on the spiritual teacher is the very basis or foundation or root in which all our good qualities will grow. And our long-held aspiration refers to this deep impulse within all beings, which is to experience happiness and be free of suffering, to have a mind that abides at peace, that is never disturbed by problems and hardships. This long-held aspiration will be fulfilled by relying on a spiritual teacher. But to rely well on a spiritual teacher takes effort from the side of the student. The student needs to train their mind in the way that is presented here. Because if the student remains dominated by afflictions, in particular in this context in relation to the teacher, if it's their afflictions that guide them rather than these teachings from Lama Tsongkhapa, the student will not recognize the tremendous good qualities in the teacher, will not appreciate the great kindness that the teacher can bring into their life. Rather, they'll criticize, they'll focus on faults, they'll disparage the teacher. And in this way, only problems and suffering will follow for that student, and the benefit that could have been brought to them, and indirectly through them to others, will be lost. So therefore, we should take these teachings as the very foundation of our ongoing journey for spiritual development and apply them, develop them within.
아니 저수기다 야구 땜바이나 소설 캡사 야구물에 소설 야구 마제바나 안지게 직경을 하기를 해야지 땜바로 하다오네 제 저기 잘라 야구 진 부이다 보라지 직녀 다시 야구제 삽섭제 비지다나 균등고 다야다 비지 침보라 지로와 다시 그 야구제 뉘에 차외제려 안지기 도나샤 비지 야구 마도만 가서 그랬지네 마담네 차야다 안 철라줘야다 디기디네 야내서 교다디 강아지야디 경어라고로디 제사디 소수게 삽섭다 디 야구를 도나체베네 야구 다야다 디네게 야구를 마체베나 아니 경험만 보라야 돼 다디서 세우로 와다
And this really is how it is. That in your lives, you'll have possessions which can bring great benefit to you, so that they're valuable in the sense that by utilizing them well, they'll bring great value into your life. And if you therefore do look after them and put them to good use, your life is that much easier. But if you damage this, it will not be able to bring you any benefit. In fact, you'll end up just suffering a loss instead. Or if you ignore it, neglect it, as if you didn't have it, then its presence in your life will also not be able to bring any benefit. So this is very much the case with relying on a spiritual teacher. It is up to the individual student to make the most of this remarkable opportunity they have, this potential for radical transformation.
Dine zada jugi nyamne yagochi tarpata tamji jibi goban to sayade jugi da jig dengi dewa togure sayade digi yonade yuro che da jigma lamni nyamne rimba dengen gibe shinyin chikogudu dia shin yimba zema so be yago chi mano wa chishingen yago chikogudu wa di chi go an de lai di yeba zin digo ma rangi tone an de beje je zunju che Lama ten ha yabu ten, and Lame temba naji ko sosogi, din hashi jesu jangache nyamlen chebaina, and dela tene, undu sinangazugi, samlo yargi toyata, nyamlen rimba yarya tugorwa, chesan yudan yen, mangbo che tsone, dela tene yungorwa, chesan denigi temba la tene, andus yarya she, dene yarya towa, tabata temchi kimo koma topsia yungorwa, dene yenzanda, chesan 낭비 가지고 남바산 예비기 총료도 제상 소수기 디기 축세디 젠다랑이게 되체 직되네 안두고르마도 강라야 마도 랑기 강야 마제바 신기 동하데 랑기 동하 세야다 랑기 디기 랑레 디기 도스테야 데니스카요 마레스 제상 텐진 저중와레 유단 겐셴 찔러 되는 두고레스 야고용고레스 제단 유단 젠데 되바서 유단 겐디 여바 찔려야 유단 겐이데 야고시 맞으면은 제보대야 야고중고 말레스 부이다고 중고 유단 겐 야고지 부이다고 중고 여바는 디제보대 부이다고 중고 제단 유단 겐셴라 되는 두고레 소소 디기 이나야 겐 유단 겐셴라 되는 두고 동아이나 유단 겐셴라 되는 두고레스 다 지용어벽에 Benishingda, Zishinda, Deso, Ben, Dondoro, Samdavena, the seven Matabamata Kigyo Martin, Mazahago Barwad, Chesnada, Yuda, Yen, Chila, Madioba, Juvasete, Gan, Yomare, Sechi, Dushine, Pa, Nanzu, Dus Dashin, Zebena, Gana, and Madioba, Druptivachi, Yomare, Sorda, that's just a do song you do, Davi, Dawa Tianjung said, Chesan, Shanla, Dune, Juba Matacale, Matuba, Rangon, Jubadi, then near your mother, Don Sachi, Mado Mare, said, on Dusine, Dentun Sungorwa.
To be able to successfully train and attain our desired state of liberation and enlightenment, it is essential to rely on the cause. It is essential to rely on the cause, which is a spiritual teacher. So independence on relying on a spiritual teacher and making effort, sustained effort, to rely on him in the way that's presented here, then we can be confident that we will be creating the causes required to attain the desired state of omniscience. Because the process of attaining an omniscient consciousness is to radically transform the mind. To know how to do so and to gain guidance in doing so, we need to rely on our spiritual teacher. Now to take this and expand this point further, the Buddha taught very clearly that our desired happiness, a state of lasting mental peace, which comes through attaining freedom from suffering and its causes, this can only be attained independence on others. It cannot be done independently. It has to be done independence on others. And others here will refer to, it can't be done through self-existent effort, but it has to be done independent on causes, such as a spiritual teacher. So for all results, desired and undesired, they come about independent on causes. The better the quality of the causes, the greater the quality of the result. here, for our goal of spiritual development, this comes about with an interdependent relationship between teacher and students and other beings as well. Another way to look at this is independence on many causes. This is similar to our material world, where in our material world things all come about independent on causes. They are not self-existent. The food we eat was grown, therefore very clearly came about independent on causes. Our entire material world is like that. So too, our mental world is all interdependent. And because our spiritual development is dependent on causes such as our teacher, causes such as training in the way that's guided, that we encourage to do, training with sufficient vigor and endurance, all these causes coming together will lead to spiritual development. And this shows that every stage of spiritual development is empty of existing by way of its own inherent nature. And it's empty of, and we can see, or we can realize that it is empty of existing by way of its own inherent nature because it's dependent on causes. It's interdependent on others. So in this way, we can take this presentation here and use it to reflect on dependent arising and therefore on emptiness, the harmony of dependent arising and the emptiness of inherent existence.
퇴 삼곰 숨세디 다디 예침보로 숨고로 와지다 퇴바세디 예침보로 세대가지 가레가레가레가레세 니수고에디 예침보로 마고나 도나 삼나 균이신야요 말지다 퇴바디 예침보로 해제 지단 퇴비기 된딜에 퇴사는다 도나라 삼마데네 야지 신야요 말와 지다다 도나데 삼당고로 해제 다 도나 삼당사나 안데 도나다 하고바나 마고바나 야기줘야 말레스 지다디 야기 줘야로 공부를 시대 제사당도 퇴시대 저기 삼로 야기 당하디 같이 당국을 해야 돼 당보 퇴고고래 지상 삼로 만들려 동아용하게 삼로디 가르가르래 디기 주에게 삼로 같이 다나 안 되는 주디기 주고를 해야 돼 산디 퇴고고로 와디 퇴시네 퇴고고라 마퇴나 하고야 말 지상 퇴셔야 돼 뒤로와 지상다 퇴비기 퇴용도 안 된다들 봐 직게 삼당이도 된다 어디 뒤에는 동아 기기도와 안 되는 시에는 개와 주고를 제부티기 용고로와 디야게 땅고도와 선배게 다디 마 바이와ල් 마소나 야부 하고에 돼 디기 주비에게 삼로디 디레도와 선배 모처여도 다디 삼로디 야네야도 다디 되는 제시도 미베시네 좀 띵해진 줍지된 바 지금 남야가 제시도 띵해진 줍지네고 야 검진 뭐 공부도 당고고래 사지 되니게 삼로디 뭐 소수기 삼로디다 샤일야 녀바다 체외 삼바가야 삼로디 판바바시 두디게 삼로지 파 삼로디 게디나디 삼로디 기투에 야게 다디 뉴바신 뭐 차서 봐있나 되니고 저기 제가 아주 공로다 녀무베를 삼로세다 자오기네 제 몇행지 차선 봤는데 탈바세 책으로 가지고 탈바도다디 니네 책으로 해서 나 니네게 삼롱 한번 자오면 은담보도 수셨는 디소현디네 아마타.
In Buddhism, the process of hearing, reflecting and meditating is greatly emphasized. And this is a specific sequence. You always will hear about hearing and then reflecting and then meditating. So hearing is first. Hearing is the process. So the word is hearing, but it also means reading and studying. This is the process of gathering knowledge. If one does not hear, but one wants to reflect or meditate, one will have no basis, one will have no knowledge to meditate on. At the very least, one will not know how to meditate, let alone have something to meditate on. So hearing is the foundation for spiritual development. But if one just leaves one's spiritual engagement at the gathering of knowledge, one will not change. One will end up feeling disappointed, perhaps frustrated. So it's imperative to utilize these two together, hearing and reflecting. As one continues to gather more knowledge, one has more to integrate through reflection. One needs to keep hearing what are the causes that lead to all unwanted mental states, in other words, suffering. And one needs to continue to hear about how to abandon those causes. By hearing this again and again, one is having reinforced what one has heard before and slowly gathering further, deeper knowledge. But through having even if it's only being reinforced what one has heard before, this aids our reflection and the deepening of our resolve to abandon the causes for suffering and the ease with which we will turn away from causes for suffering. So too with hearing again and again what are the causes for happiness and how to cultivate those causes for happiness. Hearing this again and again, even when we've just been reminded of what's been heard before, that serves to aid our integration through reflection. So these two need to be done continuously together, hearing and reflecting, and continue to do so. And as one strives in this repeatedly over a sustained period, one will start to ever more strengthen wholesome ways of thinking, weakening unwholesome ways of thinking, and giving rise to ever stronger good qualities within oneself, such as ethical restraint, concentration, and wisdom. And as one spiritually develops in this way, one's mind starts to change and one becomes aware of this. The afflictions start to arise less often. Wholesome minds dominate for longer periods. And when the afflictions do arise, one can more easily counteract them. They do not abide so long. And thereby, our mind becomes ever more at peace. And when one develops this much further, to the point that afflictions no longer can ripen, one will then never suffer, because it's afflictions that cause our suffering. And with them being unable to ripen, we are liberated from suffering. And that is where liberation is attained.
Dine radang anjugi la control sadan dosha sadige da zawgini ke me ba so tugure belana then tugure hesgoro da tuguro wa de garre na bena anjugi nang de anjugi dosha dan control gi gyun yagoji ha mogona dadi meba zawgini meba so tuye de kala ka bochegoro wa 진짜 당보 gyun ba de yagoji ha ko goro wa 진짜 배는 아주게 칼라르지 당보 직사 디기 벤 주불은 나자 쉬우제다 지금 소설 맞아 현예사는 나즈테디 지금 시송와로시 시바로 하고 통하는데 디 칼라디 다지 칼라이나 카리나디 오늘 남야 미세고 균에 사김 SMB게다 지게 샘다르 줘줘와 데니게 샘나 줘도 디 사야기 되바세데 자오긴 리기 말와 ko to chikade ka thena da di de sang me sambe samlo jomma da di za go sambe ki sam de ba kin li gyo ma de ba di de ni gi dang bo de ni gi gyun no chu chimbo shi wu ji ha go yo de ni gi je de da za go kin sang me sambe sam ta che ba sa ya gi de ba za go kin me ba chi long yong go ro ba o di na shi na ju kong zhe ge da de sha se de gi ji ko gan sin de yong go ru yu gan de de yong go re se ba da di gi de bu ani rāngdā shēnliyā nyōgī nā kāne kāne yōnggū tu sīpi tēnī kī samdāng tē tukō kyun yīmbā tē kōy dēbō yāgō mē bā, nyū yāgō mē bā tē kī rāshīn yī kā lā kāngā yō bā tē spē yāgō khā kōyā tē 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 tsāwā kī nā yāgō mīndō sēmbē kī tā tē tē mē bā sōgō sēmbē samlō chī lē hō rō wā chī tē lē hō tē tā ngā chū kī tā pē nē khōng rō sē nā this Kongro said Yakmin simply get a Jun, Chu, Tong, do, and Gidina, Kongro Masashi, and Jambada, Jambi Samloda, Jivi Samlodi, Daddy, Yana and the Bistanguro. She's a deal, Gaze and the Bistang, the nature Kongro said Namia, Zaugini gave me about the Chatugorua. She's a dinner, the Nigi Chatuyagi, Yubaruata, and Zugi, do some damage. In the Mu Kongro said, I think the Mu Kongro said, Yakumindo, some Yana, that is Missouli, Jambuche, and Yahuche, or the Yeshimburdo, some Yana, to indicate Davin, Kongro the Mun, the Yamado, Kongro Bay, Yansi, Kongro launch of Juvine, Jelia, no Kongro did this, J launch of member this, Yungu Chida, the negative, Nazuki, and Hanzu was Hako to go or that. Just not dinner that this Yungu wood, Kongro Laya, New Chavana, then Mevan Zone, Lime, never so to over the same water.
If you have doubts about your ability to spiritually develop, your ability to abandon faults, I challenge you to abandon those doubts because they are not properly founded. Everyone here can abandon attachment completely and can abandon anger completely. What is required is to engage wholeheartedly in the process of hearing and reflecting. These two done together with energy, repeatedly over a sustained period, will lead to results beyond what you deem possible for yourself in this life. So an illustration that makes this clear is if you develop let's say a food allergy. There's certain food types that at the least make you feel ill, or perhaps may even kill you. If you develop such a food allergy, you will be very mindful of what you eat. You'll always read the ingredients. You'll check very carefully that they're not traces of what will cause you pain, what may even kill you. So here we see the mental factors of mindfulness and vigilance being applied, or the mental factor of mindfulness being utilized well. One will be very aware of one's the food that one takes, the food that one consumes. So with that as an understanding, when one hears teachings on the faults of the afflictions, one really needs to reflect on these again and again and again. Because to the extent that one understands that what suffering is, and that it arises in dependence on causes, and what those causes are, one will abandon them. If one finds that one's mind for quite a while has been dominated by an affliction, one's been walking around annoyed, or attachment has been allowed to dominate, this is because one has not yet thought well enough about the causes of suffering. Where one finds that one justifies anger or pride or other afflictions in certain circumstances, noticing that is excellent, because that is a sign that one needs to reflect further on the faults of the afflictions. When one reflects well on the faults of the afflictions, one will recognize that they only cause pain, they only lead to suffering, and that they are to be abandoned in each and every circumstance. They are never to be justified. To the extent that one has reflected on that, one will see one's afflictions as one's sole enemy, that these one must be fearful of. It's only our afflictions we need to be fearful of. And together with that, we'll strive in developing the antidotes. We'll strive in developing love and compassion. And then, as love and compassion becomes ever more dominant within us, anger will arise less frequently. And when it does, we'll notice this disturbance. We'll notice the loss of peace of mind, and we'll recognize anger immediately, even though right now it will still be very slight. We'll recognize that this poses great danger, and we'll easily abandon it But to bring this about, again I must emphasize, requires sustained hearing and reflection. Where you're seeing that your spiritual transformation has been a bit limited, this then is a sign, firstly, to rejoice that this is recognized, and then to apply yourself to recognize ever more clearly the danger that the afflictions always present, and therefore the need to cultivate wholesome minds, such as love and compassion, and allow them to guide one in all situations.
Jita dosine nga kondro sedi kiedu kabla da sosuga samnalya ni kondro ki sewe che de de kondro kansi kigora sebe nga ji sosuga simjura chebe ina ane shenlya jita shenlya kondro kiedi karijine kigidu labna sosuga deba de mitumba chila kondro kigidu 소수기 되바지 미션다 콘서 소수기 되바지래 여바체 디 되바데 미튼바지 파쇼디기 이제 소수 되바데 미튼바데 제바이나 소소남사 룬나야들이 거와 콘란 거와 제가 소수기 되바데 나랑디 레 선베게다 베 제세랑 제세 숙심부 저와 나랑디 레 섬섬다도 또 거의 지겨디 말해사지 제가 네 소수기 되바데 미튼바지여도 콜리아 콘라야다 콘라야도 Dini kind of Tsushada, don't get them you to the Diligorova. Chesa Dinisha Konla, the Kanslaus, Soso than Deba de Yoba Chile, Deba de Midimba de Jebena, and the social Shala Konlaya. That's Soso Arangi, Benesosugi, Chichalaro, Chaya, Devaskaya Marwa, Sosugi Chalaro, Tamsi, Notusha Lawan, Shoshima, Charson, but young Konla Chungura, Digarchus, Sosugi, the Chaya, the Omation, the Ni Charson was out to along the Konlando. She said, the name of the Konlan said, Gandhi some time, Sosugi, Deba, Sosu Deba, meeting by Chile, the new Konla, the Chagua. She said, Sosu Deba, the Rangi Deba, the Tangiti Res and Be some Churwa, Ranking Haiti, Manoa, and Haiti Tapa, and Be some. She said, Sosugi Tapa, somebody that I being ever Omar, Mishandaji Tavana. Kyo Nordo Shas Nedi Tata Sigurwa, Chizan Ditura, Chizan Dineza, dus Konodus, Caretli dus, and Aja Samanalia, to Shimchi, Rang chasing Hedi Tata Resu, Narati Mano Tata Res and be some Shuchim Yudu, Dida Midubaji Pa, Geodu, Janda Geodu, Lamsan Delia Konla, they didn't sleep Yoruba.
So I encourage you to regularly review your mental state, how your mind has been. So perhaps at any point in the day, look back at how your mind has been and recognize when afflictions arose. So now your mind is a little calm, so you can think clearly and recall when, perhaps earlier in the day, afflictions arose and dominated. And then ask yourself the question, from what cause did that affliction arise? So let's say we take anger, because these are so easy to recognize. When you look for the cause of anger, almost always you'll recognize that someone or something acted in a way that was contrary to your wishes. And from someone or something acting in a way that was contrary to your wishes, anger arose. So you recognize there was the cause, independence on which anger arose. That means anger is a dependence arising. Being a dependent arising, it does not exist by way of its own nature. Therefore, it can be eradicated by eradicating its causes. But then, to look further, is what caused my anger this behavior or speech of another person or a particular situation one was in? Was it that? Or was it that what was happening external to me was contrary to my wishes? And there we recognize the cause of my anger wasn't so much what the other person said or did or the situation we were in, but it was rather that my wishes were not being fulfilled. And in dependence on my wishes being unfulfilled, anger arose. So therefore, if I want to be free of anger, I need to change something within myself, not outside of me. So now we're starting to look more deeply at ourselves. And we ask ourselves then the question, so who is this I that had their wishes unfulfilled or obstructed? And we look there for the self-existent self. And we come to recognize there is no such self-existent self. But there was a consciousness grasping at it. But as it doesn't exist, that consciousness is an ignorance, the ignorance of self-grasping. So from this ignorance of grasping at a self, there is a self that has various wishes. And when those wishes are obstructed, anger results, the affliction of anger results. And there you recognize for yourself how this role plays out within. That because of our ignorance, our afflictions follow, and our suffering follows. So when you think about this well, we'll recognize that the source of our anger is this ignorance of self-grasping, and it's usually coming about in dependence on things not going in accordance with our wishes in that moment. So let's say someone says something. In that moment, we dislike it and we get angry. At another time, maybe it would have no impact on us. So it's not the words. It's whether it's in accordance with our wishes, our self-grasping or not. Or let's take an event. You pick up something that's hot and you burn your hand. You drop it down, but anger arises. So there was an event that happened. It wasn't another person. And now you're angry, you're in pain. And you can recognize that this whole display arises from one's own ignorance of self-grasping. Like thinking then like this, repeatedly over a sustained period, we'll start to take ownership for our mind. We'll start to blame ever less others or situations for our problems. We'll start to search outside ever less for happiness. But recognize that happiness, sustained peace, comes through transforming our mind. So thank you. Then we can conclude there for this morning. But if you have some quick questions, then please do feel free to ask. Then enjoy your lunch.